details of terrorist threats. In Scotland, investigators look for clues in the scattered wreckage. And in Connecticut, families and friends of the victims look for answers.
It's bad enough to come to grips with things when they're accidents, but when they're an act of violence against other people, it's even more difficult to accept.
Well, good evening. Channel 3 team coverage of the disaster continuing tonight with the very latest details.
Locally tonight, one name has changed on the latest list of Connecticut victims. The name of M. Tobin is deleted, and we'll have more on that momentarily. The disaster scene in Scotland is marked by a 50-foot crater. The fuselage is found 3 miles away, and the death toll is climbing. 259 people aboard the plane, and 22 people on the ground were killed.
You're dealing with something as I would say, as
32 people in the town are dead or missing, and officials suspect a terrorist bomb as the cause. The plane had no known mechanical problems. In fact, it had recently undergone a major overhaul. The pilot indicated no trouble before the plane disappeared from the radar scope. And it blew up midair, all hallmarks, say officials, of a bomb. Plus, there was warning. An anonymous phone call.
Officials and rescue workers at the scene in Scotland today.
Well, Washington is reacting.
But we are grief-stricken with them. When the terrible dark night of the Pan Am crash finally ended, the dawn brought nothing but more misery. Bodies were thrown across the gentle Scottish countryside, pieces of luggage, part of the airplane seat scattered helter-skelter up to 20 miles in either direction of the tiny hamlet of Lockerbie. 258 people burned to death in the fiery jets. At least 15 villagers dead on the ground, killed in their cars
as well.
17 others.
President Reagan made no
counted for. The agony was everywhere.
When you actually find out the amount of devastation, then you begin to pick up the pieces. But at the moment, we're just numbed.
I've been out on the hill as well, helping. It's our bodies, it's terrible.
Well, it was an earthquake at first, didn't we? Didn't know what it was, and then we rushed outside and just all this debris coming down.
Tonight, the flight recorders have been pulled from the fiery jet skeleton, and now the townspeople try to put their lives back together. While here at home, the questions, the pain, and the mourning had just begun.
There were 240 adult passengers, 3 infants, and 16 crew members aboard that doomed flight.
From a minute of silence at the United Nations to a family's...
Which has the response in one's experience.
Tonight, President Reagan is sending people.
Those people... Prevent the crowd. News 4's David Diaz has that part of our story.
The heart-rending wail of a mother, realizing her child would not be coming home again. One of many parents and relatives who last night would ask themselves, why? Why their loved one? Today, some were asking a different question. Why the U.S. had not warned the public about what it knew, namely threats about a possible terrorist attack against Pan Am flights bound for New York, originating out of Frankfurt, sometime within a 2-week period after
I have not found all of the victims. They know there are more dead. They have found only 60 bodies, or they have 60 bodies in the mortuary. They found 90 other bodies, 150 altogether recovered. They are trying now to find the rest of the bodies. It's not right now. It's dark here, of course, but tomorrow morning they will set out again to try and find the rest of the bodies. That is one of the 3 major priorities they have in Lockerbie right now. To find those bodies, to settle the homeless. Mind you, there were at least 17 homes destroyed, and those people do not have homes, permanent homes at the moment, but it is a small, close-knit town, so they're being well taken care of. And then at first light tomorrow morning, the crash investigators will be out again, trying, if they can, to find out what caused this crash. They have, as I think you know, found the 2 black boxes. They've been taken to a British facility in
Why?
examining those boxes.
Should have been tightened. Now he says it may be necessary for U.S. airlines to take severe...
ceremony
anywhere at this airport without some security.
Otherwise, they teach them
And where you're going. At 9 this morning, a Pan Am 747 left JFK for Great Britain. Among the passengers, the families of the victims of the crash of Flight 103. Their only hopes now that they can positively identify the bodies of their sons and daughters, their mothers and fathers. The U.S. State Department was aware of threats made against Americans abroad, including threats that a Pan Am jet out of Frankfurt could be the target. Today, a Pan Am spokeswoman confirmed that the airline was aware of those threats, and she says that the airline stepped up security at airports across the globe, including Frankfurt. This morning, the chief of airport security revealed that JFK had been on a general alert since Tuesday, and security was tightened even further today. Lines were long, progress was slow. At the British Airways gate, today's passengers from London's Heathrow Airport said security was extremely tight there. Chris Sangarides and his son Tom waited for Tom's cousin.
There's nothing you could do about it, but still, it was just very close for comfort, you know?
And at the Pan Am gate, there was 21-year-old Jenny Lee Aikenhead, a student enrolled in the Syracuse exchange program who missed a train yesterday in London and missed her scheduled flight on Pan Am 103.
I can't believe I'm here. I wanted to call you, but I didn't want to. And I'm in one piece. Oh, God. It's good you're here, sir.
That's great.
How you feeling? I feel fine. I'm very relieved to be back. We heard a little bump when we landed, and I was like, oh, no. Oh, there was a big round of applause when we landed. Everyone was like, we made it. Yay.
It'll be a great Christmas this year.
Very good Christmas.
That's our present.
Yeah. Have you back home again? It's pleasant to be alive.
John and Janet, I think you'll agree. Close calls don't get much closer than that.
Especially not Newton. Do you think a lot of people are canceling flights, whether it's overseas or whatever? Have you talked to any Pan Am officials about that?
Sure, Janet. We spoke to some people in a restaurant earlier this afternoon, and they said that several of them felt comfortable about flying. They felt that at least now security is tighter than perhaps it ought to have been 2 days ago.
All right, thank you. Newton Booker with a live report from JFK in New York.
And Eyewitness News at 6 will continue in a moment with more on the victims of Flight 103.
Also a report from the services today at Syracuse University. We'll be right back.
With a new 16-page circular. Save as much as they
Line carriers and security people back then that the substance had already been apparently tested by Middle Eastern terror groups such as the May 15th organization in seemingly random airline bombings.
How could a bomb get on an airplane that goes in?
play to win?
I've intriguing possibility of sabotage being the cause of the tragic at 103 and the tightened security at airports worldwide. We have two reports beginning with Tim Minton, live from Pan Am headquarters in Midtown Manhattan. Tim?
Well, John, we would like to be able to tell you more. Yesterday, Pan Am was very forthcoming, answered all of reporters' questions, held several news conferences. But today, the dam has been put up. The answers have stopped coming. And so far today, Pan Am's corporate communications department hasn't done $100.
Okay, good morning.
Laura Rogers of Stanford and Amy Shapiro of Stanford. Tom Schultz of Ridgefield and first initial K. Noonan, whose name is just added to the list of Connecticut casualties. No hometown given. Also from Connecticut, William Gary Atkinson of Ledyard, Patricia Coyle of Wallingford, Elizabeth Marek of Brookfield, and Shannon Davis of Huntington. From Western Massachusetts, Nicole Boulanger of Shrewsbury and Wendy Lincolns of North Adams. Most were students, most not all were students at Syracuse. Turhan Ergen of West Hartford was among the Syracuse University group returning from a year of study in Europe. He had graduated locally from Kingswood, Oxford.
Tremendous energy, contributed a lot in athletics, varsity lacrosse and varsity wrestling.
Wells was never too much for Rick to help out. He was a great team player.
I remember that spirit and vitality.
The family of Scott Corey spoke with us on Eyewitness News at 5. Tragically, they had called Channel 3 last night at 11 o'clock for confirmation their son was on the plane. His name was not found initially at Syracuse. It was located through second checking and passed along. Janet?
The family and friends of Wendy Lincoln found out about the tragedy just as they were ready to leave to pick the Western Massachusetts co-ed up at the airport. As Channel 3's Bertha Coombs tells us, the town of North Adams is hard hit by the news of her death.
North Adams, Massachusetts is the type of little town that isn't often touched by national tragedy. 20 years ago, the city lost one young man to the Vietnam War. Tonight, residents are mourning the loss of Wendy Lincoln, killed in the crash.
The flag stuff.
John Flynn is well remembered at the Del Barton School in Mendham.
The work here is taking any chances. A general security alert is in effect tonight. Extra security forces have been added here at the terminal. Also, Port Authority police revealed today that prior to yesterday's Pan Am crash, they had received a special alert from Europe.
It was very general in nature.
State statutes
There's the feeling that even in this little corner of the Berkshires, they may not be safe from the tragedy of anti-American terrorism.
One can imagine what the family's going through.
Page in the yearbook, John Flynn selected a quotation from Senator Bill Bradley. It starts, "Losses are a part of every game of life. John's loss, says the priest, is immeasurable." Gloria Rojas, News 4, New Jersey.
The high school plans a memorial service.
At Syracuse University, this was the last day of finals before the students head home for the Christmas break. But nobody was celebrating because of the holiday horror. Dozens of Syracuse students were aboard Flight 103. There were memorial services on campus today, and News 4's McGee Hickey was there.
I'm so shaking, and this is just, I can't believe this is happening, and it's happening just during Christmas.
Practically everyone on this campus knew somebody in the Syracuse University London Exchange program who was...
Healing comes in this new welcome neighborhood.
The students, including 3 young men and a young woman...
They listened to the scripture for words of comfort.
community organizations. That money will be used.
Out of Florio. The university is planning a school-wide memorial when they all return in January. For now, the chancellor of Syracuse University is calling this the saddest event in the school's history.
Campus flags hung lifeless at half-staff today. Area residents have been asked to turn their Christmas lights off to keep their homes dark tonight. Teary-eyed students walked slowly across the campus today, some gathering to quietly share their disbelief, while others stayed to themselves, alone with their sorrow.
I think everybody sort of helps each other with this sort of thing, but it was just very influential on everybody, I think.
Everything stopped at once. No one knows what to make of it. And it was the worst day in Syracuse history.
The university is planning a memorial fund for the dead. Counseling is being offered for the living.
Parents don't have their children today, and I have mine. I can't explain. I think that's probably the hardest part of the whole situation. There's so much that can't be explained.
One final note. Late this afternoon, university officials held a news conference to say that they cannot confirm that 38 students were on board Flight 103. They believe now the number could be 35 students. A teary-eyed chancellor of this university then said, "We lost our best and our brightest. It is the greatest tragedy in the history of our school." From Syracuse University, McGee Hickey, News 4, New York.
Well, next month, other exchange students from Syracuse will board flights to Europe to study for a semester.
New York's John Cardinal O'Connor says he was touched personally by this tragedy. The Cardinal revealed that a woman who works as a bookkeeper for the Archdiocese lost a daughter on that flight.
Well, we're concerned about all of the families and all of the people killed. It has a very special meaning to me personally because the mother of one of the young ladies actually works in our building, so I hope to be seeing her before the day is out.
What do you say to comfort someone?
I always say when I'm talking to Catholics that, terribly difficult though it is, if we can unite this suffering with the suffering of Christ on the cross, we don't know how, it's a profound mystery, but it can radiate an enormous amount of good.
The Archdiocese says the bookkeeper lives in the Bronx. Her daughter was in her 20s and may have been returning from a business trip.
A British Airways flight en route from New Delhi to London.
Looking at the students that we've lost and remember everything that was wrong. Good.
This tragedy demands answers. Here, they can only be found in the heart. Bill Schechner, NBC News, Syracuse.
In this story of the different fates of two travelers, Syracuse student Matthew Trenter held a ticket for Flight 103, but he took an earlier flight, which is what was hardened.
Isolation did not protect him.
Lockerbie believes it was forced into a dangerous modern age. Mike Besser, NBC News, Lockerbie, Scotland.
The people of Lockerbie are the latest victims of the loss of innocence in this modern world. They chose to live in the spare countryside of southwest Scotland, in small bungalows with one main street, an old fashion shop, 300 miles from London and so much farther from the bitter feuds that have brought so much grief and death. And yet, they could not be secure in their isolation. If this was an act of terrorism, and we still don't know that for sure, of course, the people of Lockerbie are the latest to learn that there are no absolute sanctuaries from this madness. It's a war without rules or boundaries. And for all of the bravado on all sides, this is also a war without triumph. It is a war of victims, almost all of them innocent. That's Nightly News for this Thursday night. I'm Tom Schultz.
The tinkerers and the personal account of this terrible nightmare.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marek. Welcome to A Current Affair. There are a lot of stories today, terrible, tragic stories coming out of Scotland and the crash of Pan Am Flight 103. And they'll no doubt continue to emerge through the days ahead. The story we bring you now is a personal one, an account sent to us at the first light of dawn today by one of our own, Raphael Abramovich, who just happened to be in the British Isles on another story for the program The Reporters when the plane went down. It is gripping, all too graphic. We have covered some of the video in this report, but it's a measure of the price we all pay when a catastrophe occurs, either by accident or by the hand of terrorists.
I am in Lockerbie, Scotland. It's a beautiful little town. You can't see it from here, but this is where the plane came down, or at least much of the debris. There's a piece of it right here from the fuselage, and the toll was immense. It's the biggest disaster in the history of Britain. There's a backyard with 44 bodies. They're still there. No one has moved them because they're trying to figure out what happened to this airplane. So the bodies are there in the backyard. Part of a building has been ripped away. On top of the roof, it looked as if a sock was hanging from the rafter. It turned out to be a woman strapped in her seat. She was there on the roof for most of the morning until some people showed up and began to cut her loose. And it was only then that you began to realize the full horror of it. Now, they're talking about the possibility that there was an explosion or a bomb on board or something of that nature. The body that I saw lowered from that roof didn't look burned. It looked bruised. It had been battered, but there was no sign of burning. The strange thing about this place is that there are choppers overhead most of the time. There are troops here. There are policemen here. There are rescue forces. All of it much too late. The town appears to be somewhat in shock, so I have a feeling no one has really come to grips with it yet. The scene in that backyard is a horror. The notion that in that space that used to be a garden of 44 bodies that were going home for Christmas is something that I can't grasp. I stood there, I looked at it. It seemed very unreal to me then. And then I walked off into a sheep meadow. And it's always the strange things about life, or the things that survive these disasters.
Disclosure that left some distraught relatives calling for revenge.
If they find it was a large organization in one of those countries, it's set the buzzard afire. It's the only thing, it's like the bully on the block. The only thing they understand is a 2x4 across the face.
This is the CBS Evening News. Bob Schieffer sitting in tonight for Dan Rather. Good evening. Well, the announcement today from British authorities confirmed what no one really wanted to believe, that someone deliberately caused the disaster that took at least 270 lives. We begin our coverage tonight in Lockerbie, Scotland, and Anthony Mason with us.
It was a week ago tonight that Flight 103 fell out of the sky, leaving a 100-mile trail of twisted wreckage and 270 victims. Today, investigators said the evidence was conclusive. It was a bomb.
The explosive residues recovered from the debris have been positively identified
and are consistent with the use of a high-performance plastic explosive.
Investigators' first lead came when they found suitcases ripped with metal fragments. Scientific tests then detected traces of detonating explosive in 2 parts of the framework of the metal luggage hold. Search teams will continue gathering wreckage and debris, but airline engineers can now leave with a sigh of relief. Investigators have completely ruled out structural failure as a cause. In Lockerbie, where many families are still openly mourning their dead and waiting for their relatives to be identified, some today pleaded for restraint.
Let the people grieve, and if you go and try and retaliate against someone, it's just going to happen again.
It will be years before this small village recovers. Entire blocks were destroyed. 11 townspeople are missing, presumed dead. In Lockerbie today, they wondered why anyone would want this to happen to them.
Well, whatever grievance they've got, it's got nothing whatever to do with these people, especially the people in Lockerbie.
With the cause determined, the investigation can now shift. Terrorism experts will take over from airline engineers who ask who planted the bomb and how it was smuggled on board. Anthony Mason, CBS News, Lockerbie, Scotland. Investigators now believe that the bomb was most likely located in the forward luggage compartment of the Pan Am 747. We have a model here, and as you can see, one of the cargo doors is at the front of the plane. Now, here is what investigators think happened. When the bomb went off, fragments penetrated the plane's skin, the floor, and seats, and hit some of the passengers as well. The shock wave from the bomb was so powerful, it rocked the whole plane and blasted the cockpit off, and indeed a large section of the cockpit came down in one piece, some distance away from the rest of the plane's wreckage. One of the first clues that it was a bomb was the shrapnel damage investigators found. It looked a lot like this wreckage of a plane hit by a terrorist bomb in the 1960s. As for the investigation into who might have planted the bomb on Pan Am 103 and why, and what the U.S. response might be, here's Pentagon correspondent David Martin with the latest on that.
We are determined to find out who did it, another to bring them to justice.
It is an extremely difficult task.
Crew to baggage handlers, and every piece of evidence which can be recovered from the wreckage.
We're most fortunate in that the plane itself crashed on land, and by and large, apparently the recovery of evidence is more accessible than it certainly would be if it were overseas.
While the FBI is looking for the maker of this bomb, the Federal Aviation Administration will try harder to stop the next bomb before it gets aboard a plane.
We understand the FAA intends to impose some additional countermeasures to further tighten security.
In the other major airline story about the structural...
That is a sheet of newspaper. Strategically placed, experts say less than 4 pounds of modern explosives could bring down a jetliner, though the bomb, which destroyed Pan Am 103, is thought to have been much larger. There is speculation that the explosive used was Semtex, a Soviet military plastic that is especially lightweight, almost odorless, and hard to detect.
There are in development pieces of equipment that will detect very
things that it was in the state.
Home-wise, it wasn't structural failure.
One door is closed and the plane gets in there. Nothing you can do about it then.
In Stamford, Connecticut, they mourned Thomas Schultz and wrestled with questions all the country shares. Why? Who? Can we hit back? And where, in the sky or on the ground, does safety lie?
And that's the news. Bob Schieffer sitting in tonight for Dan Rather.
20 and 30. And now...
And are consistent with the use of a high-performance plastic explosive.
Based on the jumbo jet flight reportings and the long trail of wreckage, investigators believe that the bomb went off soon after the plane crossed the Scottish border at 31,000 feet, flying from London to New York. They say much more work needs to be done to pin down what kind of bomb it was and where it went off, in the plane's luggage or cargo.
This operation has developed into a criminal inquiry of international dimensions.
Experts not involved in the investigation say the bomb probably contains something like Semtex, a plastic explosive hard to detect but easy to get. Libya is believed to have tons of it.
if you happen to be a quote, Mideast terrorist group.
Bob ruled out the possibility that the bombing was a work of an ordinary criminal, someone with a grudge or a scheme for insurance money.
The investigation will be conducted in keeping with our objective.
5 bodies released by a...